Hey, welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast, where we're your hosts.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were going to say the name.
Dan and Justin, you missed the rest of the intro. It's fine.
I forgot it.
Yeah.
Where critical question makes critical answer.
Where we ask difficult questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers.
Whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
All right.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
All right. This week we're going to continue the discussion on Noah and the flood.
Yes.
We're going to be working out of chapters 7 and chapter 8. And before we get into any of the verses, I wanted to briefly cover a couple questions that are just kind of related to the saga in general, maybe not specific to any particular verse.
Yeah.
The first question I had written down.
No, that's my question, so I'll read it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
How could they store every kind of food for a year without it going bad?
I actually wrote that question.
I know, but I didn't write mine, so I was using yours.
You can have it.
Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know the answer to that question, which is why I wrote it down.
Oh.
My first thought was they're not eating meat, right? So they had to have stored fresh food of some nature and a lot of it.
Well, could they salt it? Is that a thing? Salting fruits and vegetables?
I mean, you could theoretically preserve fruits and vegetables using salt.
Man, that sounds awful, right?
We're assuming they had salt, though, and we don't know that to be a fact.
Seems like they talk about salt all over the place, you know?
Well, this is very early, remember?
Like the salt of the earth.
I mean, this is...
That was Jesus.
That was like 4,000 years later, though.
Yeah. I mean, salt was still around, though.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know if Noah knew what salt was.
Okay, well then, maybe it's just manna.
Man, what? Surprisingly,
yeah,
in some of the Babylonian flood narratives, the gods do cause it to rain down bread and manna.
Manna?
Yeah, to feed the survivors on the ark.
Is it called manna?
No.
Oh, okay.
But bread from heaven is theoretically manna in the English language.
Oh, okay. Is that what manna means?
In the modern English use, or in like the classical Hebrew Bible sense?
Classical Hebrew.
No.
Okay.
That's not what manna means. But nobody knows what that means.
Oh, really?
Typically. I mean.
Oh. Okay. Oh, yeah, because nobody knew what they were eating.
But, you know, in modern English, anything like bread from heaven is just quote unquote manna, right?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Anyways, back to the topic of the food on the boat. What if anything could they have placed on the boat that would have survived roughly a year? I thought maybe nuts, but you're not going to. Twinkies have a half-life of a couple hundred years at least.
Okay, so we got Twinkies.
We got Twinkies.
You said nuts.
Nuts.
Those are both good answers.
Berries, maybe 2 weeks out of that.
Well, hold on. How long do raisins last?
Well, raisins could last quite some time if they're in a sealed container.
Okay, there you go. Because they've had all the water.
I don't know if it could last an entire year. But that brings up a good point. Some dried fruit does have the potential of lasting some while.
That's true. Maybe they knew how to dry fruit.
It is possible.
I have a food dehydrator at home, so maybe they had one.
It does seem like dehydrated food would be a good candidate for preserving on the ark.
Mm-hmm.
But could you sustain 8 people for an entire year on nuts and dried food?
Not just, but I mean, and all the animals too, right?
Well, the animals would eat a combination of like probably barley, early varieties of wheat.
Wait a minute. Why can't humans eat that?
They could, like a cereal. Yeah.
And that doesn't go bad, right?
It does go bad after a while, but it kind of depends on how it's stored. My concern is the moisture and being like damp and dingy where it's being stored at, which would cause it to rot. You really want to keep that in a dried,
yeah, but I mean,
cool
if it's
location.
Good for the animals, it's good for the humans, and if it's not good for the animals,
well,
then...
Who said it was good for the animals?
Well, I thought you had kind of said that.
Uh-uh.
Okay.
I'm saying that's what a lot of the animals would be eating, but
Right.
I'm suggesting that it probably wouldn't last very long on the ark.
I'm guessing they didn't get sick though, the animals.
Well, we don't know that either.
Yeah, I know, but it would be really weird.
I mean, if we're assuming that the story is true at face value, then yes, they packed a bunch of food. None of the food went bad. All the animals ate it, and nobody got sick.
Right.
But I'm suggesting that seems improbable.
I'm suggesting I don't know what seems probable.
Right. That's what we're trying to suss out, though. Is
Gotta
what are the
suss it
options, right?
Yeah.
I think if they could find a way to dry or to keep the grain and the fruit dry /
It
dehydrated,
wasn't actually a year, was it?
just over.
No,
Like a year and a week.
No.
Sure was.
No. All right, it was 40 days and 40 nights,
Mhm.
and then they waited another 150, right?
No. It was 7 days, 40 days, 2 150s, another 40, and 2 7s.
Is it possible that it wasn't 250s and it was just two retellings of the same story?
There has been some suggestions that there's only one 150, but that's like a minority view. I think most people, and we can read it. We'll read that section about the 150s. It seems to be two consecutive 150s. And the format of the text backs that up in the way that it's formatted. So it's formatted in a structure that is called a chiasm, but I assume most of our viewers don't know what that is.
No, they wouldn't know what that is. We do, but
I'm sure. Yeah. Can you explain it?
You're better in using the little words.
Right. So basically, a chiasm is a structure that it's got a parallel. So it might build a ramp to a particular topic and then build an off ramp using similar features.
How do you spell that?
Chiasm,
Yeah.
CHIASM.
Chiasm. Never heard of that before.
I know it's not something that you would hear like outside of form criticism, literary criticism, or any type of theological education.
That's my jam.
What is?
A degree in English.
Yeah, I'm surprised you actually haven't heard of this.
Yeah.
Anyways, the structure basically moves in using a particular progression of topics, and then it reverses that progression of topics on the way out in a way that's roughly parallel to the way that it came in. So, for example, the way the numbers stack up in the story would be 7, 7, 40, 150, and then it backs out in the same manner, 150, 40, 7, 7.
Well, so it sounds like what? That's a poetic literary device then, instead of being factual?
Well, it could be both. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be both. Yeah. I mean, maybe God plans the structure of history in good literary formats.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyways, let's talk about the food still. If we assume that they're on the boat for a year, that presents some problems for the food, I would suspect, both in how much can be stored and also for the animals, because some of the animals eat a large amount, right? Like, let's imagine elephants.
Yeah.
How much food does an elephant consume, say, like in a given week, do you think?
Oh, well, that's a good question. And I'll tell you the answer.
You mean ChatGPT will tell us the answer?
Well, it's my account, so it counts as me doing it. So here's the answer to the question.
We're all eagerly awaiting.
Yeah. All right, it says that they eat about 220 to 660 pounds of food a day.
I'm sorry.
Not a week.
A day?
A day.
So a couple 100 pounds a day.
Yeah.
Which means if you have 2 elephants, you're let's use the lowest amount, 200 pounds. So you're at a 400 pounds per day worth of food just for the 2 elephants. And boy, that's going to add up.
Yeah, you think?
Let's imagine, let's go with the shortest possible timeline and say that it's 150 days
It would be plus 40, I think.
Yeah, plus
That would be
40.
what I would think.
And then we'll just forget about the 7s for now because that's on the edges anyway. So
Yeah.
we have roughly 200 days. So let's take 400 pounds times 200 days. We've got 80,000 pounds required to feed the elephants.
Just for 2 elephants.
Just for 2 elephants.
And there's other animals there, I presume. Like the dinosaurs probably eat a lot.
Right. Well, I don't think the dinosaurs made it. Maybe an alligator or a crocodile could have.
Maybe.
Those were actually native to that area of the world. I mean, there were freshwater crocodile or crocodile-like animals.
Mm-hmm.
They even show up in the book of Job.
Crocodile-like animals?
Yeah.
Oh.
In fact, during the Greco-Roman period, it was fashionable to import those river creatures from Egypt all the way up to the Roman and Greek empires. They were kind of like novelty type items because they weren't native up there.
Oh.
But they were really well known. I mean, nevertheless, that's a lot of food just for a couple animals.
Right. Yeah. It seems kind of unlikely.
And I think one of the questions would be what kind of problems are presented by the fact that there are some carnivorous animals, surely that would be there.
So you said it was, what, 60,000 pounds?
I think 80,000.
80,000. Because it says the ark could probably hold like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is great, but not when it's only 2 elephants of food, you know?
Right.
That's going to add up really quickly and sink the thing.
Yeah, and so what do we do with, let's assume the minimum amount. Well, there's only one cat of prey. So there's not like tigers and also lions and also panthers. Let's assume there's only one type of hunting cat.
Okay.
Even if we take a small one like a bobcat, man, bobcats still consume food. And that food is meat of other animals, which means they've got to store all kinds of other animals just for carnivorous animals to eat.
That brings up a good point that I'll raise later, but
it seems like it might be relevant now.
Yeah, but then it won't be relevant later.
Oh.
All right, I'll say it real quickly, but we're not going to get into it, okay? I think that maybe everybody on the earth, including animals, were vegetarians before the ark.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Just not God.
What?
Just not God.
What do you mean?
Well, God still wanted sacrifices.
Oh, well, that doesn't count. They weren't eating those.
No, we don't think they were.
What?
We have no indication from the Bible that they were eating meat yet.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And there was, we're actually going to get there eventually this week. There was a spot in the Noah story where God specifically says that now the animals are for your consumption.
Hey, that was going to be mine.
We're still going to get there.
I was going to say, all right.
It's okay.
See, that's why
it's your talking point. I'm going to give it to you.
You better.
All right. So let's not beat the dead horse here with the food. Needless to say, there's a lot of food that needs to go on board. And I would say even by rough calculations, I would be reluctant to think that you could fit enough food on board the ark to sustain one of every species types.
Is it possible they went fishing?
Well, I don't know. So let's move into the next topic, which is actually exactly going to play into this.
Okay.
The next question is, if the whole globe flooded, let's assume here we're taking at face value, then we're going to have a mingling of all the fresh water and all of the salt water. And I'm going to assume that the rain for the story is fresh water, right? And the waters of the deep are also fresh water. Okay. So the springs that came forth and the rain that came down, all fresh water, which means we might have roughly equal parts of salt water to non-salt water. And I think this creates problems. There's kind of an assumption that the aquatic animals lived through this whole episode.
Oh, yeah.
But, there's a lot of saltwater animals that can't survive without...
Otherwise, there'll have to be a lot of fish tanks on the ark.
Right. I think a lot of us have seen people or known people or even just come into contact with people who have rare fish,
Mm-hmm.
and they have very specific climates, very specific water,
Yeah.
acidity levels. You can't just change the environment of the water and assume that the fish is going to live.
Mm-hmm.
Even like a pet goldfish, there are parameters that you need to keep that
How long
tank
does it
within.
take for that evolution to happen?
It's a long time.
Let me ask you, is it possible that they put, like, say, tigers on the ark, and then that was it, just tigers, and then in, how long was it, like 2,000 years since the ark to present day?
Oh no, it's been longer than that. I think our gauge here is probably roughly 4,000 to 5,000
Okay,
years.
so could in 5,000 years the tiger evolve into, a cat?
In 5,000
You know?
years, yeah. I mean, it depends on the rate of the evolutionary process. And the problem is it's not linear.
Okay.
So some periods in history, we've demonstrated, or at least we have fossils that demonstrate fast and or slow periods of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have to assume it would be a very, very fast.
Is it possible there weren't that many animals in existence before the flood, and then after the flood they had like a super evolution going on?
I think in order for the story to be true,
Mm-hmm.
that has to be a yes to that question.
Okay.
If we assume that Noah only took the minimum amount of animals on the ark,
Mm-hmm.
and then those repopulated the world, then the rate of evolution would have been extreme. But we're not there yet.
Okay.
That is on our list of things that we have to get to.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, on my list, it is number 5.
Okay. Sorry.
So let's worry about the freshwater and the saltwater real quick. Can we assume that the vast majority of fish and water-dwelling creatures are now dead with the mingling of the waters?
I don't really know. I don't know how that works.
Okay.
I mean, maybe back in the day, the fish were able to live in both of them.
Right.
Maybe there weren't as many fish. I don't know. I just assumed that they were alive because otherwise they would have, came on the ark. Otherwise, God would have just wiped out all the fish, and there would never be any more fish.
So some of the animals lived.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the story, the animals that get wiped out are the ones that have the breath of life in their nostrils. There's no mention of the fish being wiped out specifically.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it seems from the story and from science, we would conclude that probably most of the water animals died off, but some of them lived, a small number.
And then evolution did the rest.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to assume that based on, the events of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hit 5 and then get back to point number 4. Number 5, let's talk about how the animals may or may not have evolved.
Okay.
So it's assumed that in order for all of the animals we have today, all the variety of species, there would have to be an extreme level of evolution after the flood. And that may be true. We don't have a way to prove that, but there are some other questions that get tagged onto this, which is, even if those animals are beginning to evolve and beginning to migrate, how do we get them to extreme regions of the earth, like Australia?
Well, there's two solutions there. One is that Pangea thing that happened billions of years ago.
Right, but we're talking
So
about
probably-
a couple thousand
Probably
years
not
ago.
gonna, but I'm just saying it could be.
Are
Just
you,
unlikely.
are you suggesting all of scientific history is actually now condensed into 6,000 years?
I kind of thought that.
Okay.
Like a young earther.
Sure.
All right.
So you're accepting the Pangea theory?
No, I'm saying it's a theory. It's possible.
Okay.
But in reality, I think, there were land bridges. I've heard of those.
There
right?
were, yeah. The popular one is up by Alaska and Russia.
And those could get covered in 4,000 years or whatever, right? right?
You mean it was initially exposed,
Yeah, that's what I.
and then the water level rose?
Right. Yeah.
Why would the water level rise?
Because I don't know. Wait, it was initially exposed, okay, and then the ark came along, and then the flood happened, and then the waters receded, and then there was the land bridge again.
Right.
So all the animals walked across it, okay, and
Sure.
then the glaciers started to melt and got rid of the land bridges.
Right. So now we're talking about like what do we do with the glaciers? Because the glaciers on timetable would have predated the flood, geologically speaking, for like hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, when did they start to melt?
I mean, that's a great question.
I thought that was only recently.
No.
I thought it was.
Well, we can find out real
Because
quick.
of man.
You mean global warming?
I do mean that, yes. What?
Okay. All right. Since 1990s, the glaciers have been rapidly melting, but let's talk about when the Ice Age actually thawed. 20,000 years ago.
Sure.
So roughly 15,000 years before the Noah events.
Sure. But it did say 1900s, so that's pretty.
No, that's a very specific set of glaciers just around the northern poles, or the northern pole.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So
I'm talking about when the Earth was in the Ice Age and began to thaw out, and the water level began to rise.
I withdraw my answer.
Okay.
It's Pangea. That's the
Pangea. All right. So the tectonic plates.
Or maybe they built arcs, miniature arcs.
Oh, the animals built their own arcs.
Yeah, that's right. Right. They were a lot smarter until they interbred. And you know what? Just say the real answer, okay?
I think the real answer is we don't really have an answer, right?
That's not what we're here for. We're here for answers.
We're here for speculation.
Oh, I was here for answers.
Oh, I'm here for speculation.
Yeah.
All right, let's.
You don't have anything else?
No, I think the problem speaks for itself. Actually, I don't think the proliferation of animals and the time span and the geological space given would have, or geographical space, I don't think it would have been possible.
Maybe they were aquatic animals, and then they did that thing where they evolved to walk on land or something.
Yeah, that's a real thing. The problem is if we're going to accept all these great evolutionary theories, then it would seem that we don't actually need the Bible to explain anything anymore, because we would just use evolution to explain it.
Yeah. It's crazy how that works.
Right? Anyways, let's move on. Let's read some of the passage.
All right.
Because I think we're going to pick out some of the parts of the narrative that probably need some questioning and some answering. Right. So this is chapter 7, verse 1. And Yahweh said to Noah, "Come you and all your household into an ark, for I have seen you as I've seen you as virtuous in front of me and this generation. Of all the pure animals, take 7 pairs, man and his woman. And of all the animals that are not pure, 2, man and his woman." Okay, so the question I have is, he's really just referring to what we would say clean and unclean animals, right?
So like pigs?
Yeah.
Or unclean?
Right, yeah. The unclean animals, you would only take 1 pair. But the clean animals, the ones you would use for eating and for ritual sacrifice, you would take 7.
What do you use the unclean ones for?
I would assume just to preserve the species, right?
They're unclean and they have no purpose, but we need to preserve the species.
Okay. I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, I wasn't going to go there, but I'm glad you did. What is the point of preserving the unclean animals? Why not just preserve the clean ones?
Right. I mean, I thought that's what God was trying to do, is get rid of sin, right?
Right.
So it wiped out all the bad people.
Right.
But he's like, I got to keep the unclean animals.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Did not consider that at all. I'm really glad you said that, though.
Oh, thank you.
But the question becomes, of the clean animals, what in the world is their purpose?
I don't know. Same thing as it was before. Eat, sacrifice, and mate.
I mean, you not Noah to mate with the clean animals.
No.
The clean animals to mate with each other.
With each other, yes.
Right, yeah, sure, that makes sense. We're
Yes.
So they weren't eating the animals, I don't think, because that doesn't happen yet. There's no command to eat the animals.
Right.
We covered that. That's going to come later. So they had to be sacrificing the animals.
On the ark.
On the ark.
Okay.
Right, which is interesting.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things we probably could have brought up in earlier chapters, but we're going to bring up now because we haven't hit it yet, is why they need animals to sacrifice when the sacrificial system hasn't been instituted yet. There's no covenant with God at Mount Sinai. There's no law given, no tabernacle, no nothing, no temple. What's the point of the sacrifice?
I have literally no idea.
Right.
I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say it's because they were doing sacrifices when this was written. And so they wanted to include it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. So this part of the narrative is traditionally credited to the priestly editors. And I think that's one of the reasons why they were wanting to include the clean animals, which is for the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. But it seems out of place because, I mean, chronologically, there was no institution of sacrifice to Yahweh yet.
Though, I mean, after they get off the ark, they do make an altar and sacrifice animals.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, and of course, Cain and Abel made sacrifices as well. One of them animal, one of them not animal.
Then maybe this was already established.
Yeah. So that's why I said we could have brought this up earlier. Is what is the point of these sacrifices? The Bible never actually explains yet why any of these sacrifices are taking place. Mm-hmm. So what is their purpose? What goal do they achieve?
I don't know.
Other than being a pleasing aroma to the Lord.
Right.
Does God need these sacrifices?
No, of course
no. Because that, in the ancient Near East, it was the sacrifice to the deities which sustained them. In fact, that's built into the flood narratives in Babylon and Sumer, and also in other flood narratives where the people they can't be completely killed off because they're required for the care and the feeding of the gods.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it almost seems like the story in the Bible is preserving that feature. It's assumed. The Bible assumes that there's an institution of sacrifice in place.
Okay.
And it assumes that the reader understands why. And it's not clear in our time that the reason why needs to exist, since we know deities don't need fed, right?
Okay, so I guess they're writing this so it sounds like the old deities, right? Which I don't know if that makes it sound like God is real or fake,
I don't know if it has, for me, if it has anything to do with being real or fake. I think it just whether or not these are relics of other stories that just didn't get sanitized.
Yeah, but later on we realize what sacrificing is for. So.
Right.
Like it has an actual purpose.
Right, which is part of the problem because, according to Pauline theology, the sacrifice was instituted by God to point towards Christ.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Which was part of the Old Covenant, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is before the Old Covenant.
Yeah.
So before the covenant, what purpose could it possibly have served?
I mean, I think it still served the same purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, people were still God believers before that, right?
Yeah, perhaps the sacrifice is just a demonstration of faith.
Yeah.
Right.
He did it.
Right.
That's what it is.
And there's no explanation in the Bible because it's assumed that, people would just instinctively know that the sacrifice is a demonstration of faith.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a sensible solution.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it.
Now we have. All right. Let's move on to the next question. All right. Our next question comes from chapter 8, verse 11. I'm going to start in 10, though. And he waited yet still another 7 days, and again he let a dove go from the ark. And the dove came to him at the evening time, and there was an olive leaf torn off in its mouth. And Noah knew that the waters had ceased from the earth, or eased from the earth. The question I had right off the bat here is where the olive leaf came from.
Okay.
Because if we're assuming now that the better part of a year, everything's been submerged, there ain't no way an olive tree survived that.
Okay.
Right?
Well, sure.
So the waters had to have subsided even if they weren't completely dried yet. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if we continue reading, let me grab the rest of that.
Yeah, I don't see the problem yet.
Right. And he waited still yet another 7 days, and he let a dove go, and it did not come back to him ever again. And it was the 600th year in the first month. And it was in the 601st year in the first month. In the first of the month, the water dried from on the earth. That's a mouthful. Anyway, the long and short of it is, a week after the dove came back with the olive leaf, it was dry enough, to exit. So the water had to have subsided at this point. But it seems to me, in order for this to be plausible, the water would have had to have subsided for a significant amount of time, enough for, say, a seed or an olive pit or a remnant of an olive tree to have survived and start regrowing or growing anew, right?
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
How quickly can an olive tree grow?
Well, that's a very good question.
I did a little bit of research
ahead
of time, so we didn't have to chat GTP in the middle of this thing.
Of course.
It turns out olive trees can grow anywhere between 18 and 24 inches in a year while they're in the sapling stage.
There you go. You got it.
In a year.
Yeah.
However, it takes almost 2 years for a seed. Say if you plant a seed in the ground, it takes almost 2 years to grow from the state of the seed into a sprout.
Well, let me ask you this. Say there was an olive tree. Is it a tree or a bush?
What's a tree?
Good. I was right. And it got covered in water, and then the water receded. I mean, I'm just saying, do we know that would kill it?
Yeah.
Why?
Absolutely. Trees can't survive underwater. They need sunlight and oxygen.
I mean, they'd have sunlight.
They won't have oxygen.
There's oxygen in water.
They don't have gills. That's not how they absorb. In fact, you can't even submerge, even if 3/4 of the tree is above the water, you can't even submerge the root bed. You would still end up with a dead tree. Because the roots themselves still need a particular mix of oxygen.
Okay. I have no response then.
Yeah.
This was an easy one for me until you asked those questions.
Right. So anyways, in order for this to work out, I think there's a couple assumptions we have to make. I don't know if any of them work, but my first assumption is that the tree had to have been on top of the mountain or close to it, which means it would have dried out first. So early in the midpoint, after the first 150 days when the waters peaked, and then the second 150 days when it started to subside, that had to have dried out first, which means it could have had roughly 100 to 150 days to resprout. The problem is you would only be looking at maybe 8 inches of sprout if it was a piece of tree that had survived. Right? Let's imagine for a second. most of the tree died in the flood, but maybe just one part of the root system survived, and it began to resprout. And that's not too far-fetched, because trees can be hard to kill. I've tried to kill trees before. I've poisoned stumps. I cut them out, grinded them out, and a year, 2 years later, guess what? Those darn roots are trying to sprout new trees.
Yeah.
It's like a never-ending battle. So I think it's safe to assume, especially a rugged tree like an olive tree, I think it's safe to assume that it might have survived, at least a small piece of it survived and resprouted. And maybe, just maybe, there was enough that one or two leaves were starting to show at the time of the dove. But I think that's giving a lot of credit to the story.
Well, the way I would look at it, I think other than Jesus and the raising of Lazarus, just Jesus, in the Old Testament, I always felt like all the miracles were based in reality, So I feel like this is plausible, therefore it probably happened.
Okay, so as long as it's plausible, you're going to count it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it sounds plausible to me. I mean, I doubt it takes that long for an olive to grow,
Right. It takes a long time.
I know, but
5 years.
I know, but I doubt it.
From a sprout to an olive is 5 to 7 years.
I'm just saying I doubt it.
Doubt what?
That it takes that long.
But it was not a matter of doubt. I mean, horticulturists already have like all this stuff documented in spreadsheets, so like when your new olive tree will start yielding fruit, so you can make profits.
Yeah, I understand, but that's just like a long time for an olive to grow. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the olive itself doesn't take that long. It takes that long for a new planted tree to develop into a large enough system where it can actually start growing olives. Like if I planted an apple tree, it's not going to give me apples next year. It takes years and years for the tree to mature.
Okay. Says that the quickest growing olive can go from seed to olive in 2 to 3 years.
Right. The quickest, though. The fastest.
Yeah, yeah.
That's giving it a lot of credit.
Yeah, I don't know. Tell me what the answer is.
Well, I don't know the answer. What I do know is that the story itself gave itself some favors by picking the olive tree, since it's such a hardy plant. It's hard to kill, but it doesn't grow particularly fast compared to some other.
I guess I would have just assumed it was symbolic.
Oh, I think that's probably the real answer. Yeah. In fact, I think the doves were probably symbolic too. The doves, the olive, or if it wasn't symbolic, they just picked the animals that were the most sensible for the region.
I think it was symbolic.
Yeah, very good. I'm okay with that.
So I'm guessing none of it actually ever happened. It was just a story.
Perhaps. And if that's true, we'll move into the next topic. If that's true, do the symbol or do the numbers given symbolize anything? The 7s, the 40s, the 150s?
I mean, as I think we've said, I think the fact that the numbers are so perfect, that obviously means that, they were faked. Just for symbolism, because we know 7 is the number of God, or you'll correct me on that.
Were they faked or estimated?
I would say faked. I mean, the number 7, that's the perfect number, so let's use it a million different times, just so people can be sure they know this is from God, It was not estimated. You don't estimate the number 7.
Well, I'm saying is it could have been roughly a week, give or take a day, a couple hours, and so it said 7. It's like if I took a trip for 28 days, I would just say I was gone for a month.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I still think it's probably symbolic. They just do that too much in the Bible.
Yeah,
with numbers like that,
That's true. There's a lot of symbology. That's why we have entire groups that like specialize in numerology, which I think is a waste of time. But
well, what about numeronomy?
I don't know what that is.
All right, go ahead.
Can you tell me what that is?
The study of numbers.
All right. Oh, numerology?
All right, go ahead.
All right.
You can cut that out.
All right. We'll definitely cut that out. Except that I'm going to leave it in.
Great.
Sure. What's our next question? Dan, I think you got some questions
Do I?
on chapter 8 that we would really like to talk about.
But we're in chapter 7.
Well, you didn't. Did you have anything on chapter 7?
Are we done with chapter 7?
Not if you're not.
No, I'm done.
Okay, then we're moving on to chapter 8.
Nice.
Very good. All right, I've got 8:4 as your very first
I believe it.
question.
I believe it.
All right, Dan, let's jump into 8:4. How about that?
Let's do it.
All right. Do we want to read that passage first before we ask the question?
We could. All right. Let's see. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat.
Good.
Bam.
And the question is, has there been any evidence of the ark? I assume found within Mount Ararat, right?
Right, yeah. Well, first of all, Mount Ararat, that's a real mountain, right?
Israel.
Does that exist right now?
Yep.
And we know that's the same mountain as back in the day?
It's assumed.
Assumed to a great degree?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't discount that as a fact. I think that's easy enough for us to deal with.
So, how big can a mountain be?
Pretty large.
Yeah, but I mean, you can probably search all of it.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a lot of mountain to be searched.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're doing an aerial view, I bet it's really easy.
Right. What are we getting at here?
Oh, just that they should have found the ark.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, there was a guy that once claimed that he took an aerial photography and found something ark-shaped.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was a perfectly logical geological explanation for it.
Well, I never heard the explanation, so I still believe it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we should look that up, shouldn't we? Maybe. Okay. We'll find that real quick. Was it Ron Wyatt was his name that claimed he found it?
I have no idea.
All right, we're gonna go to the Ark Encounter website, which is part of the Creation Museum.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what it has to say. In 1914, photographs of the northwest side of Mount Ararat were taken by a United States Intelligence Agency.
Okay.
A large structure can be seen jutting out of the ice and snow. However, the object in the images may be nothing more than a natural rock formation.
But it might not be as well.
Well, here's the explanation, though.
Go ahead.
Mount Ararat is a dormant volcano that last erupted in 1840, and many much larger eruptions occurred during the post-flood ice age. How would a wooden structure survive being buried in molten lava?
Well, I don't know.
Right. So
that's too bad.
Yeah, and remember, this is the most conservative website that is probably going to deal with whether or not the ark is really on Mount Ararat. So I'm going to go, even though I'll disagree up and down with the exhibits at the Creation Museum, I'm going to give them credit on this one and say I agree wholeheartedly with their findings.
All right. Is it possible that we could? All right. Listen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much lava exists, but would it have covered the whole ark?
Most likely, it would have destroyed the ark, even if it touched a small part of it, because it would have ignited it on fire.
Dang. So it's not under all the lava somewhere.
If it's not under lava, it's been incinerated by it.
Well, could it be under the lava and we could just chisel it out?
I would say no. I think anything that lava touches that's wood is going to get completely incinerated.
Boy, that's pretty convenient for this story, isn't it?
Well, it's convenient for people who would claim that there's no boat on Mount Ararat.
It's convenient for people who want to claim this actually happened because there's no evidence against it.
So, question, on the Ararat boat situation, just let's assume for a second that the boat did come down on Mount Ararat.
Mm-hmm.
why would we assume that it would still be discoverable today? Do we know of like organic wood material that would last that long, even if it wasn't in a volcanic region?
That's a good point.
I mean, do we have any other wooden structures from that time period
Let's see.
that would be well preserved?
Wooden structures. I don't know. Give me some.
I mean, we can Google that one. We'll say oldest
Wooden structure.
wooden
All right.
structure ever found. The oldest wooden structure in the world are in, I will never pronounce this correctly, Horyuji?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's the Horyuji Temple complex near Nora in Japan. But that's not helpful. That's a building. What about something simple? All right. Archaeologists have discovered a 7,000-year-old well, and it's the oldest wooden structure ever discovered. So the outside formation around the well is said to be 7,000 years old, which means it was built roughly 5,000 BC, and it looks like it was out of oak. Oak is a very hardy wood. It's a great wood. So, to be sure, I think we answered the question whether or not a wooden structure can survive the time period between Noah and today. And I think in rare cases, and I mean incredibly rare cases, it is plausible.
Well, what wood was the ark made out of? They said that, didn't they?
Gopher wood.
What's that?
Now that's that's a great question, because I don't actually know what gopher wood is, but the internet does. So the gopher wood is a term used in the Bible for material of no. Yeah, we knew that much. That's why we're looking it up. But what was it? Okay, the Greek Septuagint translated gopher wood as, well, it said squared timber, so that's not really helpful. So they didn't. The Greek translators did not identify it as a type of wood. It identified it as a type of processing done to wood. Okay. It looks like it did the same thing in the Latin Vulgate. So the Latin Vulgate translated it from Hebrew into timber planks. So that's actually quite interesting.
So it might be pitched wood.
Yeah, well, it's definitely pitched. The Jewish Encyclopedia states in the Babylonian, the Babylonian Gushuri is Erini. Do you know what that is? Because I don't.
No.
Okay. All right, so let's start from the beginning. The Jewish Encyclopedia states that it is most likely a translation of a Babylonian tree, which we can't pronounce, that is most likely a cedar tree.
Or?
Well, if it's Assyrian, then it's suggesting it was made of reeds, which coincidentally, in some of the oldest flood narratives, the boat was partially constructed out of reeds, which you would expect if it was like based in the Sumerian legends or any of the territories where reeds were incredibly popular, like Sumer and Babylon.
Not going to last very long, are they?
No.
What about Cypress?
Cypress is a sister of the cedar tree, correct?
Yeah.
They're relatives, basically.
Yeah.
Just like pine.
Okay.
Cedar
Are
and pine.
these strong woods?
Oh, they're very, very strong woods. Very, very rigid, very long-lasting woods. They're like the ideal wood for building ancient boats.
So that's what the ark could have been made out of.
Yeah, certainly.
And say there were no volcanic eruptions.
Right.
It could still exist, correct?
It is possible that some wooden structure of some kind still exists in some form, especially if it was as big as the ark.
Okay.
I think that's what helps the credibility of this particular question is if the ark is as big as they say it is, then could any part of that structure have survived? And an hour ago, I would have said no. However, at this point, I'm leaning towards yes.
So do you think it's just underneath lava, or?
No, I think if there's lava, it's gone.
Oh. Well, maybe the lava didn't cover it all. Of course, it seemed like it would just burn to the ground or something. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
All right, this didn't help me at all.
No.
Okay.
So the jury's out
Yeah.
on 8-4.
Have to take an expedition there.
Right. You want to bring us into the next question?
Sure do.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just read it. All right, so the water receded from the mountaintops. I know we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
However, that kind of sounds like it means it was not localized, because
Right.
mountains are pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even like today, have we ever had like a tsunami that enveloped a mountain? Or, I mean, because mountains are just too big for that, right? I know that tsunamis are big, but mountains dwarf them, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it couldn't be localized if we're really to believe it was on a mountaintop.
Yeah, I think we covered this before. I mean, according to the Bible, this was a global flood. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but I know we were talking about maybe it wasn't,
Well, I don't think it was. I think it was a series of localized floods that were similar enough in nature that it was not too far-fetched for an ancient person to assume that the flood was global, since everyone had similar memories of such a common feature, such a common, catastrophe.
Mountain, though, does it?
Well, I don't know why it would.
No, I'm saying it doesn't.
That's what I'm saying.
So we're agreeing.
No, I mean, I'm saying that what's in the Bible isn't real.
So I shouldn't.
Just because the Bible says the mountaintops were covered in water doesn't mean it were.
Okay.
Is what I'm suggesting.
I'm just saying this feels contradictory to what, to what you believe then.
Yes. When the Bible says that the water enveloped the mountains, I would say did not happen. Not a real thing.
All right, I got you.
We would have scientific evidence of water up there, and we don't.
Okay. All right.
I mean, at a bare minimum, we would have a smattering of bones and fossils of aquatic animals that came to rest on top of all these mountains.
Maybe we do.
We don't.
I mean, maybe. Have we excavated a mountain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are like one or two examples of this type of a thing happening, where we've discovered aquatic remains on top of an elevation, but nothing to the point on like a tall mountain.
Well, we'll have to keep looking. All right.
Sure.
So, it says that nowhere near the water had finally receded. But it seems to me if you're in a boat, it should be pretty obvious when the water recedes, because you can't use your boat anymore.
Right.
So I don't. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is it came to rest on Mount Ararat, right? Which means even though it was on Mount Ararat and it was on dry ground, the water itself, on near the bottom of the mountain may have still been present.
All right, that's fair.
Just like because it's dry in the top of the valley doesn't mean it's dry in the bottom of the valley.
Yeah, all right, you win that one.
I think that's when I read it. That's how I'm reading it. Is he can only see so far.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Fine. I'll give you that one.
All right. So, what about 8:17?
8:17.
Right.
Gotta suspend a lot of disbelief on this one. I mean, there are a lot of sevens we mentioned.
Well, what's in 8:17? Let's read it first.
Well, let's do it.
Right. I'm going to start in 16. And God spoke to Noah, saying, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you all the living things that are with you, of all flesh, of the birds and of the domestic animals, and all of the creeping animals that creep on the earth, and they will swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." That's what you're referring to?
Yep.
And what part of this seems to be unbelievable?
I have no idea, so we'll have to cut this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not a problem. All right, Dan, let's move on to 8:21. Can you read that for us?
Yeah, this is a thinker. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood."
Right. There's a lot to unpack there.
There really is.
In fact, I think we're going to close out our hour on this topic, on this passage. I've got a couple thoughts on that. Can you share yours first?
I mean, this is shows maybe original sin, sins of the father, all that stuff. I don't know. It's weird to say from childhood, you know.
Even the children are evil.
Yeah, I thought children were blameless. You know, they were the innocents. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, like Jesus is like, you got to have the faith of a child, right?
Right.
And now we know that God was thinking the whole time, come on, Jesus, they're all bad.
There's nothing worth saving here, right?
Right.
So when I first read this a long time ago, and it's easy to do, it reads almost like the whole flood was a waste. You know, let me go start with 21. It says, Yahweh smelled the pleasant smell, and Yahweh said in his heart, I won't curse the ground on account of humankind again, because the inclination of the human heart is bad from their youth, and I won't strike all the living again as I have done. So it sounds to me...
So we went through all that work and we're still awful.
It sounds to me, so he wiped out all the evil people, even the children and babies and unborn, right? Even the unborn weren't saved. And so this was to purge the evil, and he saved only the righteous, Noah and his family and his sons' wives. But then here, God is saying, I won't curse the ground on account of humankind again, which should have gone without saying. If the goal was to purge all of the filth and sin and save only the righteous, there would be no need for God to even make this promise. The problem would be solved.
Right.
So then he goes on and he says, because the inclination of the human heart is bad, even from their youth, so on and so forth. Now it seems like a blanket statement of humans in general, not just the humans before the flood.
Yeah, right.
So it gives me the appearance of a failure.
Right.
The flood did not accomplish the purpose.
And I mean, it didn't, obviously.
We know it didn't, because what happened in the coming chapters?
Oh, something really weird.
The Tower of Babel, the people are scattered, God has to punish.
Oh, I was talking about the next chapter.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's... yeah, Noah's children are going to get up to no good.
Right.
So...
yeah, even his children are getting up to no good.
Right.
I mean, this didn't take long.
In fact, one of his children, the sin committed by one of his children is how the invasion of Canaan is justified.
Right.
Because one of Noah's offspring curses the entire lineage.
Yeah, it's really...
which provides the justification.
Yeah. That's what that's all.
That's a tough one.
It's justification. All right.
So what does that say about the God of the Old Testament? At least so far that we've read. To me, it sounds
like he is not all-knowing.
Yeah. I don't think he's all-knowing. If he's all-knowing, then he's behaving quite weirdly. Right?
Yeah.
And the question becomes, if he's all-powerful, then why wouldn't he have just done something differently? Right? Again, for me, this goes back to the only way to justify all of this strange behavior is with open theism.
Okay.
And humans being given a free will which will not be dominated. God refuses to dominate the free will of mankind and is going to allow them to do what they do.
Yeah. Unless they do too much of it, and he'll kill them all.
Right.
But
Yeah, that's the concerning part for me. And that the trouble with the Noah story for me is that I see 10 other solutions to this problem, and then the solution that is provided in the Bible turns out not to be a solution.
Right.
Despite the horror and suffering that is ensued.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem for me. And so, again, that's why I just feel like a lot of the first 11 chapters is grasping at straws to explain things that people just didn't have explanations for.
Which, I mean, of course, they were writing this, a lot. When were they writing this?
A couple thousand years ago.
Yeah, so I bet a lot of stuff was going on, and people had questions like, why are we treating these people so terribly? Why have they had such bad luck?
Mm-hmm.
And they look at the Bible and they're like, oh, that's why.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be like, God, why are you doing this to us?
Right. And certainly when we get into the conquest narratives and even in parts of Genesis, we're going to discover that the Bible is definitely also a very political document.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of justifications for what Israel does that is found, the roots are found in Genesis, and then they grow into, the slaughter of the innocent later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which we'll get to.
Yeah.
We'll get to. Is there anything else about this passage that we should talk about? I feel like maybe we should talk about the sacrifices made to Yahweh.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We had briefly touched on it, that in the ancient Near East, sacrifices were a necessity to sustain the deities.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like the only purpose of sacrifices up to this point would be twofold. One, as a demonstration of faith, and two, as a form of incense, a pleasing aroma to the Lord, it says.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I'll be the first to say that I love a good barbecue. The fact that it is a pleasing aroma, I find no fault with. That's the most true part of this whole story, is that the barbecue Noah provided was pleasing to the smells. So I think we're all in agreement there. The concern that I have is the idea that God is physically enjoying this. Because he's not there in bodily form. Correct?
Right.
So if he's not there in bodily form, how is he even enjoying the aroma? Where is he? How is he enjoying it from his current location?
I'm sure this was written by the same group that wrote about the Garden of Eden and God walking with them in the garden. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trying to personify him more.
Sure. Well, it seems to me that the conception here is that perhaps God is in the clouds in the sky.
Yeah.
Which is where the smoke rises to. Smoke rises to the sky.
Yeah.
And thus God is able to enjoy it because it's being converted into a format that a deity could enjoy.
Well, that's cute. I like that.
So the sacrifice is a process of conversion. In fact, in the ancient Near East, there was actually a ritual called the mouth opening ritual. And what you would do when you created it like an idol, whether it was made of stone or made of wood, typically you would carve facial features like a mouth into it. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole ritual that you would take it down to the river and you would cleanse it and you would, quote unquote, open its mouth. And then there was another incantation. And when you perform the incantation on the purified idol, the spirit of the deity would then inhabit that new purified idol. So it wasn't that you were creating a deity. I think what we think of ancient idolatry is that you just carved something and then you said, this is a god.
Okay.
But in ancient times, that's not how it worked. You actually carved some sort of idol or some sort of image, and then there was a whole incantation in which it would then become possessed or inhabited by the spirit of that deity. And so when you fed the idol, even though nobody was ever around when they were actually fed, because that is done in private by the priests, so no one really sees how the sausage is made, and so they don't lose belief, right? But that whole process can be rationalized one way or another, and we read about the story of Bel and the dragon, where this is part of the apocryphal writings. Where the people finally discover that the idol is not consuming the food, the priest and his family are consuming the food, and so the jig is up. Right. So here there seems to be there's no attempt to conceal what's happening with the food. The food is actually being burned up, and it's a logical process where it is converted into a form of smoke and then elevates to the heavens where God is, and God can enjoy the aroma. I think this is actually a pretty coherent thought process in terms of how God would be enjoying the sacrifices versus what we see in other ancient cultures, which are basically sleight of hand.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, also in the Bible, I mean, it's pretty clear that you're supposed to sacrifice animals, but then you're also supposed to give them to the priests, right? For them to eat. I mean,
sure. And that's done publicly though. You're aware of what's happening.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of similar, right?
Yeah.
I would even wonder if maybe Noah and all of them ate the sacrifice or whatever, afterward.
Right. And so I think that is actually answered at one point. I mean, maybe not completely answered in a way that would be helpful, but in 9, they go on and it says, Noah, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And fear of you and dread of you will be on every living thing of the earth and on every bird of the skies, and every one that will creep on the earth, and in all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every creeping animal that is alive will be yours for food. I've given every one to you like the plant of vegetation. So it seems at this point, Noah is now being, or humanity is being granted the animals for food, whereas before they wouldn't have any food. Right. So is this the point where the sacrifices are now being enjoyed by the deity and by the person making the sacrifice?
That's a good question.
I would assume so. Listen, if you're on a boat for a year and a week, right, you survive that, I think you deserve to eat some barbecue with God.
Yeah, maybe.
I think that's your allowance. What do you think?
That makes sense to me.
All right. Well, I think we've covered as much as we can cover in 1 hour. We're going to come back and hit chapter 9 and try to get as far as we can in chapter 9 next week. There's just a little bit more about Noah we're going to hit before we move into other topics. As always, if you have any questions, if you think that we missed something, there's something that we need to circle back and recover, or maybe there are some thoughts on some topics that we did cover, but maybe we didn't cover as thorough as we could have.
Or maybe you just disagree with us and you want to yell at us.
Absolutely. We're totally open to that. Again, a lot of what we're doing is speculating on answers, and our answers are constantly shifting. And we're not here necessarily to prove anybody is right or anybody is wrong. This is really an exploration of ideas. I think we're open to any thoughts, any ideas, whether they're our own or not, because, collectively, even if we're wrong now, we can come back around and be right eventually. So sometimes you have to be wrong before you can be right.
Yes.
And I think it's also true that all of us is never as dumb as some of us.
Yeah, sometimes that's true.
Teamwork. All right, so like and subscribe and hit us up in the comments.